Good afternoon, Dumelang, Dimasiari. I'd like to welcome you all to the Nedbank CIB Analyst Fireside Chat. My name is Jones Gondo, and I'm a Senior Credit Analyst. Today, we'll be discussing the ebb and flow of our politics and how this is shaping or maybe distorting our policy environment in South Africa. As always, this is your platform too, so please join in the conversation and use the chat function to send through your questions, and thank you to those of you who've already started to do so. I'd like to start with some opening remarks to set the scene. Where, as you know, we're all facing many socio-economic difficulties in South Africa. They're broadly characterized by persistently low economic growth, rising unemployment, unsustainable public finances, and add to this, an acute global health pandemic, which only makes matters worse. Clearly, some difficult policy decisions and compromises need to be made, but it would appear that the grand political bargains that need to move the country forward are pretty much log-jammed. And hardline positions are digging in within the tripartite alliance, and it's more like a burden than a boon for policymakers. So for a market economy to function properly, we require policy certainty, rule of law, strong institutions to attract the kinds of investment flows but it seems like our market is not necessarily functioning properly. So to discuss some of these ideas, I'm joined today by Dr. Ralph Mathekga, a renowned independent political scientist, author and commentator on South Africa's political landscape. So without further ado, Dr. Mathekga, welcome. How are you feeling today?
Good afternoon.
How are you doing, Ralph? How are you feeling today? How's your mood, if I can check in that way today? I'm not sure if you can hear me, Dr. Ralph, but I'm going to get straight in into the first part of the question, which we really are trying to gauge into our ANC, the governing party and the ANC. Just in terms of context for everybody, right now we would have been in the calendar ordinarily in the throes of the National General Council of the ANC. So I wanted to start by just seeing exactly what Dr. Mathekga thinks of our midterm, where we are in terms of a midterm policy environment in South Africa. Is policy failing, or is it simply just the ebb and flow that it's evolving? And get a sense of where ANC policy resolutions are in terms of implementation is his opening remarks.
Can I be, am I live now?
You're on.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jones?
I can.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. You know, there is no load shedding where I am, so don't be scared. It's just a little bit of a technical glitch. I was getting a double feed on my system, but I heard everything that Jones was saying. I'm in a good mood. I'm looking forward to sharing with you the perspective on what I think is likely to happen with regard to the policy trajectory. And again, I don't get so much depressed with South African politics because I follow it on a daily basis. If you follow South African politics on a daily basis, you get a sense that there will be a revolution tomorrow. But when you look at things on a long term, you get a sense that the system has got a pattern. It has almost settled down, and you can almost predict what is likely to come out of the system when it comes to policy trajectory. What policies are likely to come out? What are the biggest tussle when it comes to policy position in South Africa? And also, most importantly, the question that people also look at is, will President Ramaphosa prevail over the divided party and be able to maybe demonstrate that he's being hegemonic and he's quite dominant within the ANC? So those are some of the questions that I would like to look at. And with Jones's approval, I can go ahead and give a summary.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jones. I'm very happy we are back now digitally. When I look at what's happening in South Africa, the first thing that comes to mind, looking at what is happening currently, and currently, I want to start with what I think is happening currently, and then give you a sense of what I think it means. Because if you look at what it means, it might not mean so much from what was happening before, what we are seeing now. Let me start by the current situation, the current state of our politics. The current state of our politics, we know we have a policy gridlock. There isn't much agreement at the center when it comes to what to do with policies. We have seen on the side of government, they are still negotiating with the trade union regarding cutting the public sector wage bill. We have not seen any robust shift when it comes to managing the debt within Treasury. We have not seen Treasury taking that robust shift with which one could say that the finance minister has prevailed over this. And what we have seen now recently is just the measure outcry when it comes to corruption and so forth. And a lot of people have been concerned, saying, is this a tipping point? Will this be a crisis enough? I mean, in some of the discussions I've had earlier with Jones, I've been saying that South Africa has got much more higher tolerance of crisis than we are willing to admit. This is usually how I look at the question as to whether is this a crisis enough. And my view is that perhaps we are not there yet. And what do I mean? I mean, a lot of people are angry in the last few weeks or few months, which has got to do with the COVID-19 expenditure, corruption. But what makes things worse is that all of these things seems to be taking the president's attention away from what people consider the real issues that need to be addressed within state institutions, your SOEs, and also making sure that you deal with runaway debt. But when I take a step back as a political analyst, my characterization is that, yes, I do understand people are angry, but they are not any more angry than they were maybe, I would say, a year ago or before the outbreak of the COVID. What do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, we have a highly concentrated expenditure happening within a short space of time, which has resulted in corruption. Some of us who have predicted that this was most likely to happen because there was just no way that the ANC-led government, which was struggling with corruption, it will just quickly find its way after the COVID-19 breakout. But what is the difference between now and before? My sense is that we are still at the same trajectory, but what we have now, what we've experienced now in the last few months of a lockdown is the concentration of anger. And I want to explain the concentration of anger versus normal anger. South Africans have been angry anyway before February, before the outbreak of the COVID. And their anger was much more manageable, spread across time, and not focused on one single expenditure. I mean, there was a state capture, but there were other areas of expenditure where South Africans were quite concerned, and also about dealing with what is happening within the state-owned entities. But I think what makes things look different, and the emphasis is look different as opposed to being actually different, is that in the recent months under the COVID-19, we have had this rapid expenditure happening within 3 months. And certainly, if you have that rapid expenditure concentrated within 3 months, where actually people expected such kind of a problem to happen, then you have that corruption within 3 months. The level of anger that you are going to have within these 3 months will certainly be proportionate to the rapid nature of the expenditure. So you're likely to see people coming out almost more angry because a lot of money was used within a short space. But how different is a situation where there has just been corruption normally over the months, where you don't have maybe 1 billion being spent in 1 week to make you too angry. Your anger is just nicely spread like the budget. I mean, you spread it across the month, you spend hundreds of millions there, and the anger is also proportionate to that, in a sense that it is just an anger that is spread across time. But why is it that people expect something differently, that the president will do something differently, or our politics will radically change due to the COVID-19 or the COVID pandemic expenditure and the stress that it has brought upon our state institution. This is because people believe this is going to be a tipping point. People believe that this is the moment that the president has been waiting for. He has morally gained gravitas from where people stand to be able to deal with the spread of corruption, to be able to uproot evil within the ANC. And I use a biblical term, uproot evil there. And I'm also saying that maybe people thought that the president will become much more hegemonic. He will be able to use the crisis of the COVID to be able to march through some of the reforms that he wanted. This did not happen, and it is not going to happen, and it was never going to happen. The reason being that what you find within the party is that the party, the level of factionalism, the level of corruption within the ANC, it has become deep and institutionalized to a point where actually it is becoming unwise for the president to try to root out everyone who's corrupt next week. I mean, I've seen the report of the ANC. I think I received a draft report from colleagues yesterday or so. The report that mentions people who are involved in allegations. Some, as I've seen the report, is about some impropriety, some transgressions that have happened among senior members of the party across provinces. I looked at the report and I said to myself, if the president is going to do something about it, there'll be no one left within the ANC. That is unfortunately the practical situation where we find ourselves, that if the president fight against corruption to a point where it completely dislodges the ANC, he will have no one to vote for him in the next elective conference of the party. Actually, half of members of the party will pretty much be gone, senior members, if you are going to do this thing en masse. And why is it that we have seen the president in the last few weeks maybe trying to take the anti-corruption posture in the public? It's a very simple explanation. If you cannot deal with the problems within your party, you are so constrained within your party to a point where the only pressure, I would say, point appears only in the next elective conference of the party. What do you do as the president who is held ransom by the party, that is not willing to embrace anti-corruption, because members of the party are so much implicated to a point where it even involves the strength of the institution, which is the ANC. If the party mechanism cannot give any recourse, what do you do as the president that actually carved what I call an integrity ticket, through which you actually went to an internal contest with? You even went to the election saying to people that vote for the ANC, I'm a special one, I'm different from the party, I'm going to try to sort out the party. If this project becomes undoable, what do? You resort to the naming and shaming. What is happening actually is the naming and shaming, with the president writing open letters. Open letter does not go to members of the ANC. Members of the ANC probably don't read open letters because they've got access to the president. The president can just tap them on their shoulders and say that so-and-so, stop being corrupt. But why is the president communicating that in that manner? It is actually to invoke sympathy and empathy outside the ANC, among South Africans. You then take the fight outside to the broader public, where you are actually saying to the broader public that my position is this against corruption. Join me outside. Let us put pressure even on the party through state institutions to make sure that at least we fight against corruption. For me, again, it is a desperate measure by the president who is genuinely struggling to control the party. Where does this leave the president now? And where does this leave the anti-corruption? And where does this leave the policy trajectory? Unfortunately, some of the petty battle within the party that have originated out of things such as corruption, some petty factional ideas, have evolved beyond their point of origin. I mean, as we speak, you have a group within the party that actually want to say that any attempt to go against some who are implicated in corruption, it is an attempt to push against a particular policy position, read the radical economic transformation. Even if someone good within the party, someone great emerges within the ANC and try to do a good thing. I don't know whether some of you presume President Ramaphosa is good or not. I leave the judgment. I do not judge politicians in that manner. But I can say that even if someone good comes out, that person will still belong to a faction. It will just happen to be a good faction. There is no ground within the ANC that one can stand that is not contaminated by factionalism. And unfortunately, to correct the party, to use the party's internal processes to fight against anti-corruption, like we have seen with the Integrity Commission, it's a joke. I mean, who cares about what the Integrity Commission of the ANC says? I don't care about what the Integrity Commission says because it deals with internal members of the ANC. It has got no bearing on what happened within state institution, unless otherwise members of the ANC decide what is happening within the Integrity Commission will have a bearing upon state institution. At this point in time, what matters the most to me is that there is no rampant anti-corruption maneuvers within state institution. When I say state institution, I mean the NPA. I mean, actually, I want to see the Special Investigating Unit finalizing those cases, attaching banks, maybe meeting a sense of consequences, and actually handing over the file to the NPA and for possible prosecution. But that is not happening because the war is concentrated within the ANC. We are now all about the Integrity Commission of the ANC. In all respect, ladies and gentlemen, I do have a problem with an institution, internal structure of the ANC that is struggling with its own integrity. And with all due respect, it is the institution that seems to be manned by people who are actually no longer active within the party. You look at the Integrity Commission of the ANC, it is actually retired elders within the ANC who are trying to bring that moral compass within the ANC. It's not working because the younger people within the ANC who are much set on position do not really care what the Integrity Commission actually say. Where does this all leave the president? It leaves the president quite vulnerable in a sense that he would have failed to deliver on anti-corruption for South Africans outside the ANC. And this is where the problem is, because if the president does not have a good support outside the ANC, within the party, he has been vulnerable from day one in Nasrec. And I think it was well known from Nasrec that the president did not win the power battle. But the power, I think, the way in which the president could have been seen trying to use power, it is if he forms partnership outside the party. In this naming and shaming against those who are corrupt, in the president waking up in the morning and telling us he didn't know who went to Zimbabwe on that SANDF craft. I mean, we all know. It is highly impossible that you can fly over the president without him knowing who went there. But it might be the case that he might have not agreed with that, and he just waited to be surprised with South Africans outside the ANC, as it has become quite customary. When it comes to the policy trajectory, I don't really think the ANC will break the impasse in the next few months. I think that a lot of things are going to be concentrated to the elective conference. But that has always been my thought anyway. I have never thought from Nasrec until the next elective conference, there will be something that shifts the power balance to where it allows the president to be more hegemonic. I've always thought that the only way in which we can get an expression of the shifting of the power balance, it is in the elective conference of the party, which is coming in a couple of years. But the question is, what do we do now while we are waiting for that? Certainly, we have been waiting for about 2 years. Since Nasrec, there has not been so much significant development when it comes to realigning the ANC. Actually, things have gotten worse within the ANC, if you ask me. Then what is the game plan here? The game plan, it is for the president to build a rapport, continue building a rapport outside the party, and try to push some of the policy reforms that outside the party will be seen as inevitable. The question is, will those reforms be accepted within the ANC? Actually, I would even add and say that if ANC members were hardened against reforms and against maybe a serious anti-corruption and maybe making sure the party does not get embroiled in this, if they were hardened against that 10 months ago, I think they are even more so now because the stakes are even higher now. And when the stakes are higher within the party, the point of compromise becomes difficult to reach. This is where I'm thinking it is becoming very difficult for the warring factions to compromise. My view has always been that a compromise maybe could get us to a point where South African Airways, the state still controls it, but it has got an equity partner who once in a while try to instill a sense of corporate governance. It's not that the SAA will never be looted altogether. No, my view is that maybe it can be looted once a week. If it's looted once a week on weekend, it's still better than being looted every day. So my view is that I've been thinking that there will be a compromise. So with the factions pulling apart and with the stakes being so high, and also members of the faction willing to fight even through state institutions, including the Office of the Public Protector, it makes the president vulnerable. It pushes the president even further away from a point of compromise with the faction, because that is the only way you can get some kind of movement within the state. A compromise such as some who are not willing to allow South Africa to go to the World Bank, finally saying that let us do it. The conditions are bad, but let us do it. But we don't agree with that principle. However, we see that it is the most pragmatic thing to do. That is what I've seen with that compromise. But again, my cynicism also says that if the country doesn't have money, even those who want to steal the money, they are interested in making sure that you get the money so that there is something to steal. So getting a loan from the World Bank, in principle, it can be a problem, but it unites some of the people to make sure that there is money doing the rounds in South Africa. There are some projects underway. That for me, it is that point of compromise where two factions may be driven by a different agenda, get together and identify that compromise. I don't see that coming out. I see them drifting further apart. But I want to finish quickly by saying, what is, in my summary, what is the role of the opposition in relation to this? The Democratic Alliance is resorting itself to being almost a minority party. We all know it is going to be very difficult for the DA to come back to the center. They are almost abandoning center politics. And I do understand that the party is genuinely frustrated on how to craft identity in a very fluid politics of South Africa. I think, however, that the DA having the problem at the center, not really willing to say that, look, we are the party that is going to win election through some majority. We will still push majority. We are not going to resign ourselves to a party that will just couple what you call maybe a coalition that is just based on minority. I'm worried about the DA abandoning the center, but what worries me the most about the DA abandoning the center, it actually says that if there is any party that remains stable in all of this in relative terms, it is the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF. They've got one or two problems here and there, the VBS here and there. Clicks has stupidly landed something that works for the EFF in the EFF's hands. They like an issue such as that. And I'm saying the Clicks company has foolishly allowed for that. That is how the EFF functions. When it's struggling for relevance, they latch on an issue such as that, they move with it, and politically, from political maneuvering, they have done that. But on the policy front, the problem is that there is a faction within the ANC that agrees a lot with some of the political views of the EFF, and that makes the president even more vulnerable within the ANC. That is why, without a formidable DA that is contesting at the center, you are now going to leave the ANC to the mercy of the EFF. We know what happens when the ANC is left to the mercy of the EFF. The last time they agreed on something, it was something that involves the land redistribution, which has upset quite a lot of people. But with the DA retreating from the center, you might see more agreement coming out on the side of the EFF and the ANC. And usually that is when the RET, the Radical Economic Transformation Group within the ANC, tend to actually win by almost using the EFF as a proxy for some of their policy position. So in a nutshell, colleagues, this is how it looks. Does it look worse? I don't think it looks worse, because I've never figured it out to look any differently anyway. My view has always been that we are going to stumble our way to the next elective conference of the ANC. And a lot of people have thought that by this time, majority of transgressors will be in jail. Not only are they not in jail, they are busy issuing press statements out there, Jones. So in a nutshell, that's how power looks like where I sit.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph, and that's a lot to digest, but I get the essence of it is that there's a lot of ill discipline within the ANC because there's a power vacuum that was created out of the contestation of Nasrec, and it's a difficult balance to try and keep. And one of the things that we look at is in the policy environment, right? There's cabinet, and that's part of the state. And we've seen even at the beginning of the lockdown, certain ministers that had, if you want, broken the rules or misspoke and done things that needed to see discipline and sanction. Why is the president powerless to recall ministers, reshuffle the cabinet? And there's a question here from the audience that's saying, what is the likelihood of a minister like Tito Mboweni, who seems to be quite, looking to implement reform and quite robustly do so, and also Minister Pravin Gordhan, are they likely to stay on beyond the elective conference?
I mean, thanks, Jones. Very important question about the power vacuum that actually exists within the ANC. And again, the most convenient way is to think of two factions within the ANC, but there are multiple factions. So I would say that you can never correct that. And again, it just might be the way the ANC is institutionalized going further. The best they can do is just to allow factions to speak. But the idea that one day we will wake up without factions, it's quite unrealistic. The cabinet reshuffle, why is it that we are not having a cabinet reshuffle quickly? This, Jones, is because, and I remember we spoke about this, is that the current deployment to cabinet has also been a compromise between the factions within the ANC. I mean, look at the cabinet, the current cabinet. I don't want to name ministers and so forth. We have named Mboweni, we have named Pravin Gordhan. Those are the people who can be understood to be on President Ramaphosa's side, who have actually been known to push his agenda, particularly in state-owned entities and broadly in the finance, managing of the finances. And if you look at those people that we are talking about, that the president has been able to have in the cabinet, you look at the others as well. Others, where can you look? The whole cabinet is full of compromises that have been inherited from the previous. I mean, should I start even with the Minister of Defense, whom in terms of the normal running of things, I mean, should actually, people are saying that the Minister of Defense should be fired, but you cannot do that. You have the minister within labor, you have got education, I can name all of them. And actually, if you look at it, it appears to me that President Ramaphosa has been able to secure a compromise on what you can call key portfolios, your finance, your state-owned enterprises and so forth, and so forth. But again, those portfolios do not work on their own. They have to work with other portfolio. They have to work within the broader machinery of the state, including other cabinet portfolios. And again, even beyond cabinet, go to parliament as well. You'll also find the same type of compromise about who leads parliamentary committees and so forth, almost split across the factions. So it means that when you are looking at a cabinet reshuffle, you are also talking about a long drawn process of renegotiating who is going out and who is going in. It is going to be a very difficult process. I mean, probably this is the longest time in South Africa in recent times that we have not yet had a cabinet reshuffle. But my view is that maybe the president is not interested in governing through cabinet. Maybe he just wants to do what he has been doing all along, governing through ad hoc committees. You just put together an ad hoc committee, it comes up with recommendation, and then you get it done. And you've got strong people at the presidency to be able to implement your policies without really having to worry about the delegation of responsibilities across other departments. I thought that was the process that was underway much earlier on. Whenever the president wants to solve something, he has resorted to an ad hoc committee. So I think it's going to take a lot of negotiations. As to the position of Mboweni and Pravin Gordhan, I have a sense that the two are also thinking beyond the president. I think they're also thinking about their legacy. What kind of exit are they going to have from government? Is it going to be an honorable exit where you live by taking a position? When I see Pravin Gordhan, when I see particularly Minister Mboweni looks like it is someone who is saying that I know my days are numbered, but I'm going to leave. At least I'm going to have a dignified exit where I'm going to take a principled position. I mean, this is the minister who gets scolded now and again for his public utterances. He utters those things in the public because I've got a sense that the president almost kicks him, saying that, can you just say that thing, then I'll call you to order 3 days down the line. Please say it, then I will publicly ask you to apologize, but you would have said it. Because in most cases, you look at what Minister Mboweni is saying, they are not too far from what you can consider to be President Ramaphosa's worldview. So those are allies. Minister Pravin Gordhan, he's actually much more under pressure than Mboweni. Mboweni allocates, and Minister Pravin Gordhan is looking at the area where we have seen problem of corruption. Your state-owned entities, how do you manage that? What kind of governance are you going to bring to that? And I think that is why we don't actually see much action in that, because there are certain moral things that have not been dealt with. I don't know whether if this government has decided morally not to own state-owned entity, or is it because they are just concerned with corruption, which means if they've got a good partner to help them own it and run it, they could work on that. But those are issues that have not been decided upon. Countless papers coming out and proposal, yet you don't find a clear sense. Are we going to own this thing, or we are going to let go, or we are going to partially own it, and so forth? Those are the moral issues that need to be dealt with, that I think Minister Pravin Gordhan is also battling with.
I think for us as economists, things are a little bit more, calculable, like 1 + 1 = 2. And one of those things that we're looking at is the fiscal cliff, right? Does it actually land within the different factions that, there's no more money left in the fiscus, and they surely, they're in a worse off position if we don't change course. So, what we're trying to understand is, what is the alternative? I mean, the alternatives are that we go for a hard fiscal landing, or we end up at the World Bank and IMF, which is clearly where they don't want to be. No one wants to be forced to cut expenditures, especially to their constituencies. So, how do those realities land within the political space?
Within the current policy discourse in South Africa, and I want to say in South Africa because I'm including also the EFF, I'm also including opposition parties. Within the current policy discourse, the challenge of that fiscal cliff, the runaway debt trajectory, it's not understood as a key problem. You need to understand there are people who fundamentally do not have a problem with the debt. And there are people who fundamentally say that, look, you've got to spend more, you can even spend more, and so forth. So we need to be very clear that in most cases, when we talk about this, Jones, when we talk about the fiscal problem, it's an issue in certain cycles. But broadly, within the policy discourse, at least within the rhetoric of policy discourse in South Africa, the rhetoric of policy discourse, the whole thing of debt management is not a big issue. Actually, I would say parties such as the EFF, probably they don't have a position on that. There are some within the ANC probably who might be of the view that South Africa is just too rich. This is just a scare tactic by some in the financial sector to try to cut the projects that are underway that are helping the people and so forth. So we are not in agreement about it. I often compare this thing to the debate about big government. The whole idea that we've got too many departments, we've got big government, we've got to cut down. It's not a dominant issue in South Africa's policy discourse. Yes, if you go to Britain, you go to the USA, you might find some conservatives actually talking about big government, about cutting expenditure. But when you come here, it just doesn't resonate. It just doesn't have gravitas within the broader policy rhetoric discourse. So what does that mean? The reality is that we are just going to run out of money and we will start cutting down on the project. I do know that at some point we are going to take harsh measures. We are going to make those cuts, but we are going to make them when some people believe it is inevitable to make those cuts. And at this point, I don't think it is a crisis enough for people. I don't think those that do not agree with this idea at this point see the cuts as inevitable. But there will be the point where cuts are inevitable, and I'm hoping it will be the time that we can still rescue certain things. But at this point, I want to be very honest with you. I'll be lying if I tell you that the cut in the budget, it is at the broader issue of the policy rhetoric. I mean, I was just speaking to the media about Nehau, which says that they're going to strike. And my view, I was saying to one journalist that, look, if you are this government that has just mismanaged the money relating to the COVID-19, how do you tell someone to moderate on their wage demand? How do you regain the moral gravitas to tell the union that we have got financial problem? Please moderate on your wage demand to the best interest of South Africans. They're just going to laugh at you because it is laughable when it comes from the ANC-led government.
So do you, in your view then, you're not expecting any big policy moves or changes for the MTBPS, and also the idea of zero-based budgeting, will it be effective? And perhaps the last thing to put across that people really want to know is, what is the probability of having prescribed assets if people really believe in big government and developmental state?
Let me start with prescribed assets. I mean, there is a suspicion, no doubt. If you have your own pension that are going to be used for that, it just simply means the state is actually giving guarantee. And my concern is that as time goes by, a lot of public servants, I think, are going to start taking an individual position. Those who have put their pensions are going to take an individual position. I'll quickly remind you of a case before the 2014 elections when government wanted to regulate the withdrawal of pensions by public servants. It was through National Treasury. It was before the elections, and government brought regulations that actually limit the withdrawal. But the unions took individual position where they were saying that you are not about to tell us what to do with our pensions and so forth. And Treasury withdrew that thing going into the elections. We are going into local government elections, Jones, next year, which is, during the elections, the party that governs keeps on giving. And after that elections, we'll be going into another set of elections. So unfortunately, I don't see any drive to push against the broader idea of prescribed asset, but I see there will be individual concern from specific unions. I mean, remember, things are changing in a very interesting way when it comes to how unions take a position. Remember, when during the course of the lockdown, it was COSATU together with the business that actually said people must go back to work because government just cannot sustain this social security. It was very strange that a union that is leftist is taking that position. But there is also a recognition that we've got to protect the interest of our workers, which is why I don't really think it is going to be an open season when it comes to prescribed asset. I think the problem of legitimacy that government is experiencing in managing resources will be a drag when it comes to prescribed asset. Zero-based budgeting. Well, I used to work for Treasury. There is no such thing as zero-based budgeting, but okay, that's fine. What do we mean by zero-based budgeting? Actually, Jones, the aim of zero-based budgeting, this has been tried far back. I mean, people like Kuben, Andrew Donaldson, Kuben Naidu, they used to talk about this zero-based budgeting. Some of them used to say we need a 2-year fiscal year because you can't have, if you are going to take the budget seriously and budget, 12 months is not enough to come up with a proper budget. The reason why we do it quickly within 12 months is simply because we just ratify the previous budget, some incremental on certain areas, and we call it a budget. Actually, we just top up and we call it a budget. We don't even remove some of the things such as some of the capital expenditure, and we don't even do what we call budget baseline analysis. So the truth is that you are not going to get zero-based budgeting, but you might get some elements of zero-based budgeting. When I say some elements of zero-based budgeting, I mean with a good political intention and a good political will. Someone at Treasury can start saying, let us clean program 1 on the budget. Program 1 is where we put administration in the budget, admin. That's where the salaries are. That's where all the nonsense in the budget goes in. Excuse my language on a webinar, but that's the bloating of the budget. You go to that program 1, which is admin. Usually that program, it's not so much interrogated. It's about salaries, about PECs and so forth. But you can bring the element of zero budgeting where you are saying, I want you to do the baseline analysis, the budget baseline stripping. You can do that without necessarily going to zero base, because zero-based budgeting in its purest form is impossible. I don't think we can do that as South Africa. What we can do is rather to clean our budget, target certain programs, and make sure that those who come with capital expenditure, they are showing us about future commitment on those line items going forward. It's not the new talk about zero-based. We talked about this thing at Treasury when I was at Treasury in 2010. We even tried, and I think I can say this, someone else from Europe tried to help us to reform the budget. And I think it was the EU. They paid a certain amount to Treasury to try to find other systems. And we brought in people to try to help us with the budget baseline analysis, just to remove distortions in our budget. That project on its own failed, as I see it.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph. In the last few minutes that we have, I wanted you to have a chance to explain what you wrote about recently about lawfare and why you think this is a particularly interesting dynamic in terms of the policy-making environment. And also, if you can end off, what do you think the legacy of the Zondo Commission is going to be? Are we going to see any particular result out of that, given the constraints, capacity constraints in prosecutions?
Thanks, Jones. The lawfare that you're talking about, for me, it's what I call a bargaining democracy. You see, the problem is that if you look at South Africa now, you look at the center of power, if you can locate it, because I think we have got multiple centers of power. You have got Luthuli House, you have got the Union Building, and probably you have got Parliament as well. So if you look at that, you don't get a sense as to what is the national agenda. There is nothing that I think defines, or you can say rise above or stand above everything else when it comes to policy. So you don't have government that has crafted a message or a national agenda that one can say it is appreciated by all irrespective. But what does this all say? It actually says that comes down to that lawfare, or what I call bargaining democracy. This is very simple in the way in which I explain it, is that groups are just going to contest for what they want on policy. And they are going to use the court, and they will use other lobby mechanism to try to contest what they want in policy. I'll give an example. The unions now are saying that we will not stand down on our demand for wage increase because it has been signed. They are going to court. They will go to court and do all to try to bargain only for them. It's got nothing to do with the taxpayer. It's just for the unions, and they care much about their members. And maybe on the same token, some NGO will then go to court, or maybe even try to lobby Parliament. And when we are going to see this thing of people taking the budget to court. Note what I'm saying here, Jones. We are going to see a situation where people are willing to try to contest the budget processes in court. So what I'm trying to say is that another group realized that the best way for them to achieve an agenda, what do? They go to court or they lobby. The same thing, women as well, who are struggling with gender-based violence, and the system is failing them. At the center of the system, it is failing them. The police and the broader policy cannot respond to the question of gender-based violence. How are women going to win this thing? it is very simple. They're just going to have to block the streets and go to court and lobby for their own. So what you end up with the type of democracy where everybody else is bargaining. Powerful groups or groups that maybe they can organize themselves, they end up just lobbying the power and trying to use the court and other avenues of lobbying to say that this is our concern and we want you to look into it. Some will say that that's how democracy functions. But my view is that, yes, you can lobby democracy, but there need to be a clear sense of a central agenda. The problem is that we don't have that central agenda. So it creates a situation where the powerful groups are the ones that might end up with their voices being heard. And what happens when a scenario comes out where the powerful are seen to be having it all? Then the poor will resort to their easiest, the most available means, which is to hit the street and protest and disrupt everyone. That is why I think Chief Justice Zondo, to end off Jones, he's very much frustrated. And I think there will be something out of the Zondo. I think the report, I'm already seeing the report of the Zondo Commission coming out. It is going to be an explosive report. And even if the political principal might not do anything about the report, I think this report will be crafted in a way that someone can go to court and demand action. I think the Deputy Chief Justice is aware of the general failure of institutions. He has been expressing that in the last few days, and I think he's going to craft what I call a self-execution report. What do I mean by self-execution? It will be drafted in a way that it can execute itself and it will arrive at somewhere. He's not going to leave it to the political principal to sit on that report and studying it. It's going to be a different report we're looking at here. Thank you so much, Jones.
Dr. Mathekga, thank you very much. There's never, ever really enough time to actually get through all the different things that are evolving in our polity. But I think the big questions remain around the ability for the state to move in the so-called unity or social compacts in order to get policy to move. And it seems as though there'll be lots of more contestation in the coming months and years as we get towards an elective conference. And so there's no single source of power. There's no one with a hammer to get through all of this, which makes it very much complex even for analysts like us to look at each event risk and see our way through it. But thank you again, and good afternoon to everybody. We hope to see you again on one of these chats.